Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Trustees, September 30th, 2024. I call this meeting to order, and I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
He's muted. Still on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
You certainly can.
Mayor Citrin,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Lindsay,
Present.
Trustee Brooke,
Present.
Trustee Shara,
Present via Zoom.
and Trustee Turner.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. All members being present, would you rise, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, now everybody is here, of course, for this Verizon presentation, and we will get to that shortly. We do have two housekeeping matters that we have to address first due to time constraints. Deputy Mayor Lindsay will explain one, and I'll explain the other. We have hired on a part-time basis a very competent clerk by the name of Claudia Bakhtari. She has been working long and hard on the paperwork, which is enormous, to receive a grant for all the green energy projects that the village has engaged in. The paper submission, it's obviously digital, but the paper submission for all the proof of all the work we've done, as well as the board resolution, which has to be done tonight, has to be submitted by midnight tonight. So this being the last few hours in order to timely submit and to request the grant, which could be upwards of $40,000, Claudia's been working long and very hard. So the first motion is to authorize additional time for her. She was initially authorized 30 hours of part-time work. She'll need another 10 hours to complete her job. So we'll start with the first resolution. Would you be good enough to read it, Deputy Mayor?
Sure. Be it resolved that the Board of Trustees approve a total of 40 hours for temporary assistant Claudia Bakhtari to assist in grant writing procedures for the Climate Smart Committee.
Okay, your motion,
I'd
Deputy
like
Mayor.
to make the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. The second one involves
I'm
the
sorry,
actual.
Mayor, can I just, Deputy Mayor, did you say an additional 40 hours?
No, a total of
A
40
total,
hours.
okay, thank you.
We authorized 30. This is actually an additional
Right.
10.
Thank you.
Total of 40. All right, Deputy Mayor, the floor is yours to explain to the public and the Board of Trustees the second resolution.
Okay, so part of the requirement for being certified as a clean energy community, which is the deadline is tonight, we needed to do the action called benchmarking, which is tracking the utility usage in all of our municipal buildings that are greater than 1,000 square feet. And we also, which has been done, thank you to Claudia and John and Elizabeth, and we all work together. But we need to pass a resolution that the benchmarking will be made public, that we will set dates for when the next year we will complete our benchmarking for the current year, a calendar year, and then that data can be used in our budgeting process, as well as it can be applied toward future grant applications. Because if we have set the benchmarking now, we can prove in the future if we've been able to reduce our utility usage. If we reduce it by 10%, we get additional awards. If we reduce it more percentage-wise, then we'll get even more awards from the state. They are very much eager for municipalities to reduce their utility usage in buildings. So the resolution is attached. And would you like me to read the whereas?
Yes, please.
Whereas buildings are the single largest user of energy in the state of New York, the poorest performing buildings typically use several times the energy of the highest performing buildings for the exact same building use. And whereas collecting, reporting, and sharing building energy data on a regular basis allows municipal officials and the public to understand the energy performance of municipal buildings relative to similar buildings nationwide. And equipped with this information, the Village of Tuxedo Park is able to make smarter, more cost-effective operational and capital investment decisions, reward efficiency, and drive widespread continuous improvement. And whereas the Village of Tuxedo Park Board of Trustees desires to use building energy benchmarking, a process of measuring a building's energy use, tracking that use over time, and comparing performance to similar buildings in order to promote the public health, safety, and welfare by making available good, actionable information on municipal building energy use to help identify opportunities to cut costs and reduce pollution in the Village of Tuxedo Park. And whereas the Village of Tuxedo Park Board of Trustees desires to establish procedure or guidelines for Village of Tuxedo Park staff to conduct such building energy benchmarking. And now, therefore, it is hereby, I'd like to make the motion to determines that the following specific policies and procedures are hereby adopted. And then we go on to all kinds of definitions. But basically, the motion is to adopt the benchmarking policy.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make that motion.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion among the trustees?
It's just for the municipal property, right?
It's only municipal buildings over 100, I'm sorry, over 1,000 square feet.
Anybody else?
Josh?
Okay,
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Unanimous. Okay.
So
Thank-
now Claudia can go and submit this as an attachment and get our application, our certification materials in by midnight.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now to the reason we're all really here.
Mayor,
As-
I'm so sorry. Can I just interrupt just very quickly to two quick housekeeping things? First
Go
of
ahead,
all,
Elizabeth.
I'm sorry. But first, just to let everybody know that bulk pickup has been moved to October 19th. A lot of people called. I kept telling them it was the 12th, but it was moved to the 19th. So I just want to get the word out as quickly as possible. And also, at the last board meeting, somebody left behind a water bottle from West Virginia University College of Law. So I still have it if anybody wants to pick it up.
Thank
I'm
you,
done.
Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So as everyone in this room and on Zoom is aware, Verizon Wireless has made a proposal to erect a cell tower here in the village. As part of this process, which I wanted to be as open as possible, I distributed via email essentially a series of documents to allow all residents to view the proposal in terms of what the tower would look like, some information regarding health. And as part of this process, we are now going to get a formal presentation from the Verizon Wireless folks, or the people who are working on their behalf, and I'm glad we have such a large turnout. I want to explain how this meeting is going to run. Verizon Wireless will make their presentation. It will be visible to everyone on Zoom. At the conclusion of their presentation, we'll have a period of questions and answers. To those of you that have questions about the proposal, please feel free, either first in the room and then on Zoom, to put your questions to the Verizon personnel. Once that is complete, we'll have a public comment period. The public comment period, unlike the period we have at the regular board meeting, will be limited to the issue at hand. So if you came here to talk about snow plowing or the lakes, I'd ask you to wait to the October 18th meeting. If you have something to say about the Verizon Wireless proposal, you'll get 3 minutes to make your statement at the podium if you're here in person or on Zoom. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Verizon, and they have a screen share presentation to make to everyone.
Just give me one moment to get that set up and we will get this presentation started.
You can introduce yourself to the public.
Yeah, I like it. Well, thank you, Mayor, Village Board of Trustees, and members of the public. We appreciate the time tonight for Verizon Wireless to give a proposal to lease some space at the Ridge Road Water Tank. I'm here with Kathy Pomponio, our real estate market manager with Verizon Wireless. Also with us is Scott Olson. He's the attorney for Verizon Wireless with Young Summer. And really the brains and know-how of how the network works and operates. It's Brendan Hennessy, RF engineer. He's really the guy to ask why here. And he'll go into a little more depth in this presentation. So 1 second while I share my screen here. Looks like I might have dropped John.
If you join back in, I'll share it.
Or alternatively, just email to John. Sure.
We did it before. We were.
I apologize. There's probably gonna be a couple minute delay, so.
Technology never seems to work when you need it, right? Remember the good old days when the room was filled with people and there were no screens?
I should be available, John, if you can.
And,
Sorry about that. No, I don't know why we dropped, but my apologies.
Recording in progress.
Turn off your audio. Turn off your audio.
It's saying the audio's off. There we go.
You should be here right now.
All right, here we go. Yeah. Yeah, we'll just wait one moment. Here we go. So as I was saying, Kathy Pomponio, real estate market manager, Scott Olson, our attorney, and our RF engineer, the why of the network, why here, location, how it's going to cover the certain areas of the village. He's our RF design engineer. And I want to first state that, this particular proposal is a monopine proposal. So while a traditional cell tower that people see, this is meant to be as visually less obtrusive as possible. And I think we're going to show some studies here that indicate very little visibility, if any at all, in this particular location. This is an example of an Ashcraft Pond site in the Adirondacks. The Adirondack Park Association has very strict requirements with respect to cell towers. In most cases, you need to build a monopine, which is what we're proposing here. I don't know, for members of the audience and the Village Board of Trustees, the cell tower in this picture is right here. So I just want to make sure I point that out. It's very inconspicuous. Next.
And that, just to point out that that's not a simulation, that's an as-built photo of the existing structure.
And this one actually is a photo simulation, but it will be followed by an as-built photo. This is the same Ashcraft Pond in the Adirondacks. And that one has an arrow pointing to where the site is. Here's another as-built photo. And as I move my cursor here, that's the monopine. This map right here, this slide really presents the very little visibility that there is. This is generated from computer GIS, and the red indicates areas not visible due to topography. So that's the vast majority of the area. The yellow indicates not visible due to the vegetation. As most people are aware, this park has a very good tree canopy, and there's a lot of trees here. And that certainly helps in not making this visible. There's a few small areas where this might be visible. And we've showed some of those in some of our photo simulations, which are to follow. This is the study that we did. In order to do the photo simulations that you see of this proposal, we flew a balloon at 105 feet, and that balloon then is translated into a photo simulator, which we overlay the monopine. So there is a little bit of a science behind this. We drove throughout the village of Tuxedo Park. We took a number of photos, mostly where it would be visible. In a lot of locations through the previous map that I showed you, we know it's not visible due to the topography of the area. This really is outside Village Hall, but it identifies the tree canopy. There's a tree canopy throughout the village that's very, very good and sort of blocking a lot of the views. This is a particular photo where it is in fact visible a little bit. If you see here just above my cursor, you can actually see the balloon. It's very hard to see with the naked eye. I would have to zoom into the screen to show that. But that is from Anio Road and West Lake Road. It's about 1.22 miles from the site. And then here's another photograph from another location on East Summit Road, 27 East Summit Road. You can sort of see a little pixel of the balloon at that height. And this is another looking from along West Lake Road, 1.13 miles from the site. And this is actually a simulation below. So again, without the simulation, with the simulation, without.
What's the tower to the left?
So as the mayor said, we'll answer those questions, but it is an AM radio tower that is predates, not structurally viable in our belief.
Shortwave radio towers on private property.
This is another photo looking southeast from Westlake Road, and maybe you can get a little glimpse. It's really hard to see this balloon, but just above my cursor, there's an orange balloon. It's about a 3-foot balloon that we flew at 105 feet. That indicates where the top of that tower would be. Given the ridge line in the background, this really presents a good opportunity to make this not very visible at all, as we'll show with the simulations. And here's another one. This along Westlake Road. There's a simulation. So this is before and after. And this one, you sort of looking closer, you can kind of pinpoint the balloon a little bit better here. So that's with the monopine.
Could you hold that photo so they get you can actually see the monopine, how it would appear? Okay, thank you.
That's the before with the balloon. So then our next slide is really the real question of why we need it here. And Verizon Wireless is committed to improving coverage. And I just want to remind everybody that, coverage isn't just for people and users to use their data for phones or go on social media. It truly does help for emergency services. We've seen with North Carolina, the recent tragedy that happened there. And a lot of times people don't really realize that there is a critical need for our services. As a volunteer firefighter myself, I do know that we use these services through Verizon and through other carriers to respond to calls. to know if there's another engine that's going to be backed up. For EMTs, it's also good to have the information handy as to somebody's medical background, if they need to utilize that, so they're not prescribing the wrong drugs. That might be, it's hard to diagnose somebody on the spot. You can bring up this medical background instantly on the spot, and those are some critical things that go beyond the coverage that a lot of people think of with respect to cell coverage.
All right, thanks, Brian. So the next slides are just going to take you through some of the predicted coverage simulations, which are done in computer software. Basically, the computer software, we punch in the height of the tower, the directions, the models of the antennas, etc., and it'll produce these plots that we're about to show you. Next slide. So this is just a general overview. I'm sorry if I'm standing in the way. This is a general overview of the colors that you're going to see on these next prediction slides. The dark green, so that's not included in these slides. We typically only use that for urban environments to show dense and building penetration. So that's not going to be included in this presentation. You're going to see green, yellow, orange, and then we call it white here, but basically no color is considered white as far as this is concerned. So those colors represent different signal level thresholds. And next to those thresholds, you can see at those thresholds what that would typically serve. So for example, anywhere covered with green, you're going to typically serve suburban single family residential and light commercial buildings. So that I would say that probably fits a lot of the buildings in this park here. The yellow we have typically serves the most rural suburban residential. So again, the yellow would also serve the types of buildings that are within the village here. Orange is where it gets dicey, is what I'll say. So that orange represents rural highway coverage. Also subject to variable conditions, including fading and seasonality gaps. So fading can occur when you are driving to or from a site at a particular speed. You can essentially, it degrades the signal due to destructive and constructive interference. I won't get all into that on you guys, but essentially fading equals reduced signal viability, usability. Seasonality gaps, what we mean by that is up here where you are, 4-season area. So, half the year we have leaves, half the year we don't, give or take. Our signal is actually heavily affected, especially our mid-band frequencies. It's actually heavily affected by the leaves on the trees. I know that sounds silly, but we actually do see quite a bit of degradation in our signal due to that. So what I mean by this, areas in orange, yes, you'll get coverage, but you might not in the summer months because of the seasonality. Okay, so that's typically what we're trying to convey there. So here are two plots. The left plot here is showing what your existing low band coverage is. So I'm going to talk about low band coverage and mid band coverage. Low band coverage is our lower frequencies. So I'm talking about 700 and 850 megahertz. Those applications are typically more your voice coverage type applications. Those are the frequencies that typically get inside your buildings. They just propagate a lot better due to physics. Again, that's your voice type of applications, light data type stuff. The mid-band, which we'll get to, is going to be kind of the application bread and butter, right? So if you're surfing on the internet, if you're streaming, you're uploading, you're watching YouTube, anything like that, you're going to want to be served by that mid-band frequency. They provide the better data speeds and they're more efficient too. So we'll get to that when I talk to the mid-band, but the mid-band frequencies, just know they get users on and off a lot more quickly than the low-band frequencies do. So here, back to the maps here. On the left is your existing low-band coverage. So for low-band, we use 700 megahertz for these maps. And that represents all the low-band frequencies coverage because they're close in frequency. So the left is existing. So as you can see, on the eastern portion of the lake, you have decent coverage, although it's coming from a site that is quite a bit of ways to the north on top of a mountain. So you're being served by quite a distant site, which can, it can cause. When that happens, the site that's serving needs to use more resources in order to serve the customers. So that's actually causing, some congestion issues with that site. So when that happens, we need to offload that site. And then not only will the area where the new site is improved, but also the site that was offloaded, that area will see improvements as well. So that's where your coverage is coming from here on the left. I've got a couple of pins there. So Tuxedo Road, that is the location we're proposing. Tuxedo DT, you can see near 87. That is actually a site that's already built for us. It's not active yet. We're awaiting fiber delivery. So once we get that will be on air, is what we call an active site. So on the left, you're just being shown that marginal coverage from Tuxedo. You can see on the east side, it's okay. A lot of orange still. On the west side, mostly orange, some areas of no coverage. And again, this is your low band, so it's only going to get worse from here as far as the midband frequencies go. On the right, you can see the coverage from the proposed site. So the Tuxedo Road pin, that is what the predicted coverage would be if the proposed site were to come to fruition. So you can see, so I'm sorry, I misspoke a little bit. On the right, you're actually seeing coverage from our proposed Tuxedo Road site and the Tuxedo downtown site, if it were on air. Being that it's constructed, approved, we're just waiting fiber, we can, assume that coverage is going to be there. So when we're looking at the park itself, you can see much more green. I'm sorry, go back to the low band quick, Brent.
Yep.
Thank you. You can see a lot more ubiquitous green coverage around the lake. There's a few areas where we kind of point out it starts to get back into that orange level of kind of marginal service. And with areas like that, we have, if the site comes on air and it is determined that the signal is low in those areas, we have small cell solutions that we could potentially fill in with that. So not a huge concern with those two areas identified. And one other thing I'd like to point out while we are on this slide is the police icon. That is the location of the police department. And then, Tuxedo Road obviously runs west into the park. And I know that has been specifically relayed to me as an area of concern from the village. So you can see with Tuxedo Road is actually not improving the coverage at the booth. As you can see, it's near Tuxedo DT and along Tuxedo Road. So Tuxedo DT is going to provide more coverage to the guard booth and that entrance of Tuxedo Road. Whereas the Tuxedo Road site will cover the park. Okay, go ahead. So here is the midband frequencies. So same area, okay, same scale. And what you're seeing on the left is the existing midband coverage. Okay, so it's home. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
No problem.
No, I can't see.
Okay.
What's good for
There you go.
I want to make sure you're
Make
near
sure
the
you're near
mic
the
so
mic,
that
though.
people on Zoom.
Okay, sure. So the slide on the left is your existing Verizon midband coverage. You can see it's almost non-existent. There is some to the northeast, but again, that's coming from distance challenge site Tuxedo up north on the mountain. So that's not really getting inside. That's barely getting outside. It might not even be outside right now with the leaves on. Okay, so that's that orange. Now, when you look to the right, that's again with Tuxedo DT and our proposed site on air. And that is what the midband coverage would look like after. So you can see the area here, actually, where we are now. And then the north of the lake, up by the school, not the school so much with midband, but low band, will cover the school nicely. Straight across, you can see it's just a night and day difference as far as the midband frequencies go. And again, the midband, that's your data centric kind of layer that, you're streaming, your internet goes out, you want to throw your phone on a hotspot to get you through until it comes back up, things like that. The low band isn't going to provide that for you. So just a few points here in summary. Tuxedo DT will provide coverage to the police and portions of Tuxedo Road. Tuxedo Road site will provide generally ubiquitous coverage throughout the park on the low band frequencies. There will be some gaps in the mid band, but that's due to the nature of the propagation characteristics. And the areas just west of the proposed site in the mid band props, you can see there is no coverage. Can you just go back to the back one, please?
Yep.
So you see those areas right near our proposed site where I've circled. Those are not going to receive mid-band frequencies from the proposed site, and that's due to terrain. So essentially, RF is line of sight, but it doesn't bend. So if I'm at 95 feet at the Tuxedo Road pin, and then the terrain drops down toward the lake, it's what we call shadowing. It's just not going to cover because, you know, you essentially have that dead spot right under. So that's what you're seeing there. And go ahead. So here are some further slides to just illustrate that the Tuxedo DT site is not going to provide coverage to the park. And you know, essentially why we need this Tuxedo Road site in order to serve you guys. So on the left, again, that's your existing coverage. So Tuxedo Road and Tuxedo DT are not active in that. And this is your low band, so that's 700, 850 megahertz. The coverage on the right is just with Tuxedo DT active. So the park, Tuxedo Road is not active, Tuxedo DT is. And you can see there's really generally no change in coverage within the park when you're comparing the two photos. So Tuxedo DT will not have any effect on the coverage in the park. This is the same thing, just with the mid-band frequencies. Again, you can see nearly non-existent as it stands. When Tuxedo DT comes on there, that area will be very well served. But again, it does not clear that terrain that's in between the park and 87. Okay. With that, I'll pass it back to Brian.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I think now be the opportunity to open it up for any questions. And really, I mean, I think this is a time to learn not only from, you know, learn from the residents as well. So
Sure. We'll start with the room and everybody here on Zoom.
You might want to.
Should we take that?
Yeah.
Mayor, the audio is great. There's no issues
Okay.
on Zoom.
Thank you, trustee Sheriff. Okay, let's start in the room. Questions from, we'll start with Mr. Mahan.
Thank you for your time today. And the first thing I would like to say is these questions are not intended to be anti-cell service, but to clarify what has been done and what is assessed here. To help us, we hired 2 consultants to review the quality of your work and their assessment. One of them is Gunderson Technical Consultants, who did the work in Bedford. And the other is George Jams, who was the expert here on visual simulation in the village and helped write the ridgeline laws, at least as it relates to the simulation requirements for them. So we're taking this very seriously, and we've been informed, these questions have been informed by experts. After this, we'll make sure all the members of the Board of Trustees have a copy of these questions so that, you know, after this meeting, as part of your review, you can follow up with Verizon and make sure this is properly done. The first one would be on the height of a cell tower, and you proposed 105 feet. Our understanding is based on the FCC requirements that you would be required or they can be added onto, and the village can't protest it, that there's a law to promote cell service, that if you put it up at 105, we could be up to 150 with 2 additional carriers added, and there's nothing the village could do to prevent that. And I think if you did something, the village would want co-location, which means the tower has to get bigger to have proper co-location. So if other carriers were added, how tall would the tower end up being?
I'll let Kathy. I'll let you
That's a
guys.
great question, and
Yeah.
I think Scott can answer that. There is.
Yeah, I can answer. So, a good, very good point.
Just
There
stand
is-
up, please,
Oh,
when you
sure.
when you answer.
So people on Zoom can hear.
It's a very good point, and yes, there is what's called 6409 law that, states that once a tower height is approved, that you can add, a certain, is it 20 feet, 20%?
Speak up a little bit?
Yes, sure. After an approval, without having to come back to a board for review. However, since the village is leasing, they're going to be the landlord here. They could make it a condition of a lease agreement between the village and Verizon that tower cannot be extended. So that would be a decision that you could make.
But why would the board want to limit cell service, improve cell service to Verizon? We have AT&T customers, we have Sprint, and we have T-Mobile. So if you're gonna put up a cell tower, I would think it would make sense that all the carriers and all the customers served in Tuxedo Park would benefit, and not just Verizon customers.
And that is true as well. So if the board, it would be a decision of the board to see, how many carriers we could fit on the tower that's being proposed today. And make that decision based on what's best visually, structurally, and for RF.
Well, can I just follow up? Yeah,
The follow-up question is, though, if we said in the lease that it could only be 95 feet, you're the lawyer, does that mean that you could not increase it at that point? Full stop?
Yeah, that's correct, because you are placing that condition, you basically are trumping the federal law. The federal law wouldn't come into play in that situation because you are the property owner. You are putting a condition on the use of your property.
the follow-up question would be, if the other carriers, we wanted the other carriers to use that facility, would that require an extension? In other words, if we said T-Mobile, AT&T, because people have that service in the park, would that require you, as part of your agreement with those other carriers and the leasing of that tower, to raise the height above 105 feet?
With our approval, though.
Yeah, but is it?
It would depend on their network design, and we'd have to collaborate with them.
Yeah, so just real quick on that, with this particular site that we proposed, we believe that we are at the minimum height necessary to meet our objectives. So I can't speak for the other carriers, but from an RF engineering perspective, I would have to assume that the other carriers would not want to go below us based on our findings.
But I'd articulate that the village should be providing an opportunity for cell service for all the residents and not just Verizon. Consider that, and we should realistically then think about the height that would be required if we wanted to provide an opportunity for all customers of cell service, not just Verizon customers here in the village.
One point to clarify, is it 105 or 110? Because I saw both.
So it's 95 to the center of the antennas, but because in this case we're placing a monopine, the tree needs a cone to make it look natural. So that adds a little bit of height to the tower. So the tower itself is 100 feet, but there's a 5-foot cone on top of that with branches to make it look more natural, not a
The top is 105.
105,
Right.
correct?
So there's another set of questions, and this is going to be a while. We don't have a telecommunications law in the village, right? Most of them, I think Michelle's an expert, having put the one in the town of Tuxedo, would require fall zones and fall zone coverage, particularly of 100, let's just assume it's 140 feet because we decide to. There's a water tower and there's property next door. And we considered, and then I would urge the trustees to make sure that the fall zones that would be typically in telecommunications are applied when evaluating this proposal and making sure that the fall zone would not be, close to our water tower, which is an important resource, but also the neighboring.
What's the question, Is there a question or is that, you can make this statement after the question and answers, but there's a lot of people that may have questions. You're free to make your
Is there a
statement.
fall zone around the tower in your current plan?
That's the question.
So towers can be designed with what's called a breakpoint, and the engineer can design it so it will fall within a certain parameter. And we would engineer a certain fall zone radius as part of this application moving forward. I mean, this is still in preliminary stages, but certainly we can make that a condition of approval or further discussions.
Can I add- Sorry, can I add one thing to that? You mentioned earlier, assume 140-foot tower. I just want to clarify, even under the federal law, if that applied, it wouldn't, if you chose to condition it, it wouldn't be 140 feet. It can only be either, 10% of what the height of the tower is or 20 feet. What you're talking about is a little beyond that. So I just want to make sure that people understand that.
Okay. But back to the fall zone. So even in that specific engineer, what is the distance?
I've seen breakpoints as much as 40, as little as 40%, right? Or even 40% below.
Because that site is closer than 40 feet to the water tower, how would you adjust for that?
We don't typically adjust to a water tower. We would adjust to a property line typically,
It's
but
also 50 feet to the property line.
Well, the other thing is, and I am not an engineer, but I've seen engineers' reports. Properly designed, constructed, maintained towers, they do not fall. I know people may seem shocked by that, but they don't.
But you have to plan for failure.
Well, we do by following all of the proper standards and building codes that are in place. So we take into account all the wind shearing and ice, all that stuff like that. I know you,
I build wind farms. I've never heard that.
okay,
I say they don't fall either, but we plan for it.
okay, but no, I appreciate your honesty that they don't fall, like,
But we plan
but
for
you,
it.
understood.
You're being required to plan for it.
And you-
People do it and they shouldn't be falling on neighboring property.
Yeah, no, it won't.
That's not, we had a 140-foot tower with property 50 feet away. I don't think you can guarantee that.
Next question.
So photo simulations, according to our village requirements, should show reasonable worst case conditions, which are leaf off, no snow, as required by code. Further, the images should be clear and have a high resolution. In looking at what you are showing, they are low resolution. There's no articulation of the camera lens that was used. They are definitely.
You're making a statement. This is question and answer, Mr. Mahan.
Did you?
You can make this statement at the end of the question and answer session.
So why? did
Please
you not-
put it in the form of a question.
Okay, thank you for being antagonistic. I'm trying not to be antagonistic.
This is question and answer. You're going to be free to make your
So why
statement.
have you not provided a set of photo simulations consistent with our codes in reasonable worst case leaf off conditions? Our code would also require you to show the form simulations with including the trees removed and the plot site. And why have we not been provided with that set of simulations?
So one thing, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, jumping in. What section of the code is that applies? Of the village code?
The ridgeline code, like there's four sections.
Okay.
Ridgeline. So there's four sets of the codes. There's site requirements on 17-3. There are codes 100-3, where it has to promote and protect significant historic scenic assets of the village. There is 100-54 A and C, which is required the Architectural Review Board to consider the aesthetic and performance of the applicable zoning requirements of the village, which is where they require these reasonable worst case leaf off conditions. And there is the code 76.3, which is discuss how the tower will comply using non-private property. So there's a minimum, four sets of our current requirements that need to be adapted to the planning board. I think the Board of Zoning Appeals, the bar, and to work through the approvals, unless we're going to waive the appropriate set of approvals, which I don't think would be appropriate for the village.
So and I'll take a look at those sections you referenced, but when I looked at the code before, I saw minimal to very little
There's no,
telecommunications.
these are not telecommunications, these are
Okay.
aesthetic.
And I just didn't see anything about the leaf off condition, but I'll take a look at that.
Let me just interrupt. The issue of whether this plan goes before the various appointed boards is a discretionary decision that will be made by the village board upon consultation with council. So having a debate about it now is not gonna serve any purpose. But I understand your point, and certainly once the board starts to discuss this both in open forum as well as upon advice of legal counsel, we will address the issue of how the cell tower relates to those sections of the code that you cited. So on to the next question, please.
Mayor, can I interrupt for a second, please? I think somebody's in the waiting room trying to get in.
I don't see anybody in the waiting room. I just
Oh.
looked.
I see a few. Do you want me to see if I can admit them?
Sure.
Thanks. I admitted them, so.
Well, I mean, would Verizon do a leaf off simulation for us so that we can make sure we're evaluating consistent with the standards at Tuxedo Park?
If that's what the village board requires, then absolutely, we'll absolutely do that. I just would like to preface all of this by stating that this is an informational session. This is not a zoning proceeding yet. If we get there, then we will discuss further requirements. This is informational. at
That's a
this
good,
point.
it's good suggestion for us to consider.
Yes,
Your view shed map, shows very visibility. But again, it's done on existing conditions, not during leaf off conditions. And it doesn't, show it doesn't appropriately show, so it shows that I would not see it. I live next door to it. I will definitely see it, particularly on leaf off conditions. So I think I would ask Verizon if they would also provide a visibility analysis updated for leaf off conditions in the winter, not just, in a highly foliaged area. I would also state that a lot of our trees are deciduous, so they lose their leaves.
Next question, Mr. Mahan.
I think that is, well, the other major question is what alternatives have been considered, and do we work with the village to understand other alternatives as opposed to one in a highly dense residential neighborhood. With, I think that already, and we'll talk about this at the end in comments, significant people who are quite agitated about this. So have you guys considered other alternatives for solving the problem, and even on private land? Because I think there are people here who might be able to facilitate buying private land to move to create other alternatives.
Sure, we've been working on this project for a number of years. The previous board of trustees, and I think even boards before that during Hurricane Irene, originally reached out to Verizon Wireless. There's been a numerous number of complaints from users. So we've been trying to find a suitable location. We've tried private property. We've looked at locations even suggested to us as of today. I mean, we're open to discussing these, any potential location. The hardship we have is, as you know, the topography in this area, and that's what makes it such a beautiful scenic area with great vistas and great recreational opportunities and everything about it. It's a beautiful village. Unfortunately, that topography sometimes plays to the hardship of allowing us to cover this as easily as we could other places.
And if you consider distributed, most communities in higher end communities, and I would consider Tuxedo Park a higher end community, are focused on distributed systems and not tower-based systems, which distributed systems are much less visibly impactful. And has that been something that's been considered instead of the easy solution, which is putting a large tower in a residential neighborhood?
Sure, that has been considered, and our RF engineer can certainly explain a little more.
Yeah, so Verizon typically does not cover villages with small cells. Why would we cover something with 10 sites when you can cover it with one, right? From a business perspective, right? So small cells are typically more of a capacity driven solution. a macro versus a small cell, one's not obsolete over the other. It's just a different tool in our toolbox. So where you will see small cells are like very, very high dense areas in spots where we have overlapping coverage from a macro. And this is to offload overloaded macros, who have traffic, that they cannot currently handle. So we put a small cell in, it draws traffic off the macro, everyone's happy. Another spot you'll see small cells typically in Verizon's network, are spot coverages. So 1 to 2 small cells, which we've alluded to in the presentation of where our proposed site falls short in the community. We would fill in these gaps with the small cells. That is typically the applications you will see small cells used for Verizon's network.
I haven't most higher end communities, I know Scarsdale just did the law, that would discourage large towers in residential neighborhoods and make small cells be the solution for aesthetically pleasing historic communities, as the solution, as opposed to what is easy for Verizon economically, but not necessarily a great answer for us from an aesthetic perspective.
So that's your statement. Thank you, Mr. Mahan. Anybody else in the room have questions? You'll get a chance to make your statements at the end of the proceeding. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, the other side of that ridge is 350 feet taller than where you're planning on putting the current tower. Is there a reason why you haven't investigated the other side of the wee walls and the lake?
I'm not sure exactly which area you're referring to.
Do you have a map? I'll show you.
Yeah,
You're
sure.
talking about Pawtucket?
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah, we looked at it.
Sterling Forest is higher, this mountain is higher, it's a lot higher than where you're planning on putting it, and I know why you want to do that. Because of the development that's going down the valley.
That development will need a separate solution.
So is that in conjunction with what you're planning here?
We're in talks with the developer there, yes.
And then is there anything else further north
Further north.
in terms of tower planning? Because usually you develop a whole corridor, not just one place.
Yeah, we've activated many sites along the 87 corridor north of here.
No, I know you have, but is there a name for the plan other than that, the Tuxedo Park cell tower? In
There is
other
a,
words, are we working on a whole corridor or are we
It
working
exists.
specifically here?
there's a plan to put a tower across from what the old defunct Red Apple Rest. I went to a town planning board meeting where it was discussed in detail. I think the attorney was present at that meeting, so that's a tower that would service north and south along 17, but would not reach Tuxedo Park because of the high ridge and
Right.
Lookout
Right,
Mountain.
but you did consider that positioning over there, or it doesn't matter? In other words, if it's that much higher,
When you say over there, I don't know where you're
because
talking.
there's a mountain, there's a crest ridge over there. One of it's part of Sterling Forest, and the other one.
that's where we went today.
So I mean.
If it's that much higher, why didn't you put it over there?
We looked at it today.
Well, just because it's higher, well, you should know, sorry, just because it's higher doesn't mean that it works better. That's not the science behind it necessarily.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to explain this on a map a little bit more.
Okay.
If it'll help.
The other carriers.
Hey, Matt, let me jump in for a second, just to answer the question, because I brought them up there today to go look at another site. And what I was surprised by is they said based on the topography, the tower there would actually have to be like 60 feet higher. And that because the trees there are much lower, that it would stand out basically 100 feet on it as a like massive pole. So they're gonna do more analysis to see what that would actually look like and come back to us. That's where the other water tower is. They're gonna do some analysis, come back to us with pictures of what that would look like, et cetera. And we will look at it, but based on the analysis they did online beforehand and looking at it today, they think the tower would actually have to be much taller and therefore be much more of an eyesore.
This is reference to the Pawtucket
Yeah,
side.
Pawtucket site, yeah.
Okay.
Which I was surprised by. I didn't expect that. And
What about like Eagle Mountain and some of those other places that are much taller?
great question. And again, I'm not the expert, but the issue with Eagle Mountain is there's no road. They need to have access. Well, yes, yes.
Did you look at the other carriers, towers around, like when you go on cell map or the towers around, look at those when you're designing the system?
Matt, would you stand up to the podium and feel free to ask your question?
Did you look at the other carriers, towers? That are so far here, 51, because when you look, there's probably 6 or 7 around. I mean, I can see one from my house directly across for co-location.
Matt, great point. We do look at all these other towers that are within the area that's needed for coverage, and Brendan, our RF engineer, really identifies the best location for us to be. None of those towers, I believe, work, but we can certainly take another look and do it. I doubt that any of these are viable for us, but certainly we can take a closer look at that.
We do, and we always look at co-location first. I mean,
Yeah.
Mr. Mann mentioned easy. We're gonna do easy. That's what we do. When we co-locate on existing steel, it's easy. But it doesn't always work for us. Typically, we need to be in the center of the coverage objective in order to have it work.
If you want to provide that location of the site that you can see from your house, we can evaluate that. That would be good.
Yeah.
That's the north one you guys were referencing earlier. And
That's the same one.
yeah.
Okay. Anyone else in the room have a question for the Verizon team? Okay, let's turn to Zoom. Do we have anyone on Zoom that wants to address the Verizon team with a question? Chi-Yin Hempel, I see you up there.
Hi, thank you very much, Mayor. I have two questions, and forgive me if I'm using layman terms. I need to make some sort of a statement first, Mayor. I understand from reading that when you build a cell tower, you need to have put the tower, the foundation of the tower, as well as its backup generator and the fuel tank on a concrete platform. So given the height of the tower of, let's say, anything from 105 to 130, depending on whether other carriers are joining you, how big would that platform be, approximately? And therefore, given the terrain up in Ridge Road, how many trees are we talking about taking down? That's the first question. The second question is, is your planning for the tower, the location, is it affected in any way by the fact that the proposed tower is so close to 2 historic houses that are specifically listed on the National Register of Historic Places, on which the entire village of Tuxedo Park is listed on? So 2 questions.
Thank you for those questions. Appreciated. As far as our Verizon wireless platform, we're about 12 feet by 6 feet, 11 inches.
Is that the equipment platform? Can we clarify that question?
Chi-Yin,
Maybe total.
are you asking about?
Total. You need to have a clearing, because when I look at other cell towers, you have a platform, and that platform is usually fenced with chain link fencing. So I'm talking about the entire area that needs to be cleared and concreted in order to put the foundation for your tower, to give the clearance, safety clearance that you talk about earlier, and also to house the backup generator and the fuel tank, because I understand that the cell towers run on electricity. So it needs to have a backup generator because ONR sometimes doesn't work.
So
Sure. So we're looking at a lease area of 70 feet by 30 feet. As far as, a lot of that area is somewhat cleared right now. There certainly would be some tree removal. We could study that a little more to understand the quantity of tree removal, but it's not like it's going to be a big 70-foot by 30-foot concrete pad. It'd be a 12-foot by 6-foot, 11-inch concrete pad for Verizon's equipment. That equipment can be screened. There's certainly a lot of screening in the vegetation in that area, but we can additionally screen it through fencing. As I mentioned, this would be a monopine proposal, so the tree would be proposed. I was up in the Adirondacks a few weeks ago. I was only 50 feet from a monopine. I didn't even know that it was a monopine. I mean, these things have gotten really good in terms of the aesthetic and the way they look. The bark almost looks real. You really have to be an expert to know it's not a tree in many cases. And like I said, the tree quantity, I could estimate it, but I'd hesitate to do that at this point. I'd take a closer look and get you a quantity of tree removal. But the great news is, if you were to do what's called a raw land location, maybe a forested location, we would have to clear a lot more trees. In this case, you have access to the water tank property. You have an ability to set a crane. You have an ability to work around placing the tower monopine for construction, where in a number of sites, you may not have that.
I'm sorry, I'm being obtuse. What is this 70-foot times 30-foot that you're talking about earlier?
That is the lease area. So that is
Right. The amount of property we will lease from the village.
I see, on the village property, and the
Correct.
clearing, the concrete platform will be 12 times 6.
That would be the concrete, the 70-foot by 30-foot would be a clearing as well. That space would.
But
be
it will
cleared.
not all be concrete.
Right.
It won't be, okay, so you have a 12 by 6 concrete platform surrounded by 70 times 30-foot clearing, free of trees, in order to accommodate, and that whole area presumably, in order to protect your equipment, will need to be chain link fenced, correct?
It'll have some type of a fence around it.
Okay, and typically chain link.
Whatever the village board asks us to.
Okay,
Yes,
Typically
it's
they are,
chain
but
link,
they could also be discussed with the board and there are other options.
Okay. I guess I am thank you for saying that you will do a tree count or whatever it is. I'm surprised you say that there won't be that many trees down, because that entire hilltop around the water tank is covered by old oak trees that goes up anything from 30 to 50 feet tall. So that's a statement, sorry. So my second question about any special consideration given our status on the National Register, and also the proximity to 2 significant historic houses.
Yeah.
19th century.
So we do have to go through a regulatory process, which includes SHPO.
Right.
So this will have to be reviewed by historic preservation. And
Right.
typically in these situations, they would ask us to do what the village has already asked us to do, which is to conceal the tower as a tree. And
So
we do it all across the state. We work with SHPO, and this is their typical response in these situations.
Could you tell us what the initials stand for so everyone
State
understands?
Historic Preservation.
There we go. Okay.
But isn't also there is an environmental impact review as well? In
Yes,
addition to the
yes.
Preservation Act review?
That is also part of our federal regulatory process. It's called NEPA.
Okay, so
That
these.
We go through a federal regulatory process as well.
So
It
these,
includes NEPA and SHPO.
NEPA stands for,
Oh.
Does anyone
National
understand?
Environmental Protection Act.
thank you.
so just to clarify, those 2 federal reviews will be additional to any village level review.
Correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Anyone else have a question for the Verizon team? Anybody? Oh,
We have one additional question on the regulation. I think it's section 106.
Could you
could
speak
you
up,
stand,
please?
stand up, take the podium, Mr. Mahan?
So there's another additional regulation that should probably be addressed, which is section 106 of the Federal Historic Historic Community National Register of Historic Places. I think that stopped a lot of your activity in New York in some of those activities because they viewed them as historic places. I know it was one of the congressmen put that issue forth and then.
Well, you're asking him to
So
address
would
it.
you make sure, take us through the review process for National Register for Historic Places, as well, not on a federal basis, not a state basis.
Sure, there's actually, they're kind of combined in a sense, because they kind of, there's an interplay between them. As part of the NEPA review, the National Environmental Protection Act, we have to comply with the local, the state, SHPO. That's part of the 106 review. And we do that as a matter of course on every single tower that we have to do it. It's a legal requirement. So if this board were to grant us a lease, before we did any work in construction, we'd have to obtain the SHPO 106 sign off from them. And they would review it, they will look at our photo sims, and they will make an independent determination as to what they think is the appropriate course.
And isn't it also true that if the village granted you a lease, they kind of lose control other than the subject of the terms of the lease and you're, once a lease is granted or an option on the lease, it's in Verizon's control and not the village.
Well, no, I mean, we still have to complete all of our due diligence with those federal and state requirements, as well as any local requirements, zoning and.
But
Are you talking about terms of the lease?
No, if they granted you a lease subject and they wanted to still review it, the kind of control flips to you guys and it goes out of village hands except for whatever requirements are in the lease.
It's still a zoning
Well,
process.
whatever zoning, local zoning is required, we have to send the local planning board and or zoning board of appeals may be involved in reviewing the actual site details also and under your local zoning. So, but in terms of the lease terms, that would be, if they decide to go forward with it, there would be a negotiation
I mean,
process.
it's all subject to negotiation. We throw out terms, some of which they may accept, some of which they may reject, and ultimately, if we can't reach an agreement that satisfies the board and the board's attorney, then we don't enter into the lease. I mean, it's like the lease of any property, whether it's a house or a cell tower or any type of real estate. So it's two sides trying to negotiate something, regardless of where the tower ends up, if it turns out to be a tower. I mean, we're arm's length in terms of our transaction. Okay, all right. Ms. Shaw, your hand is up.
You're on mute.
She's still muted.
She has to unmute herself. She has to unmute herself.
Should we go to the next person then, while we wait for her?
I can't help her. She has to unmute.
Okay, to try Pels and ask.
I just had a question about the cost and what the cost to build this tower is, and has there been an analysis done comparing that to the cost of putting in the smaller solutions? I think it was like a micro tower or a micro solution that is much less visible and doesn't go as tall in the on the mountainside. I understand Verizon doesn't like to do that smaller micro solution for these type of applications, and it's probably because of money. And I think the town should do an analysis of that.
Could you just identify yourself for the record, because this is being recorded and we have minutes that we make.
Robert Pels Brown, 74 Cliff Road.
Thank you.
That's my middle name.
Okay, thank you. Any answer to that?
So as far as the cost is concerned, this hasn't been fully engineered yet. So once it has not yet been fully engineered. Again, this is very preliminary. We would have to fully engineer it to determine what the cost of the facility is going to be. Regarding small cells, again, typically, small cells work in conjunction with a macro cell, which does not exist in this area. So we were talking about filling in with a couple of small cells with this one macro solution. And, a cost analysis on small cells, I mean, we typically would not cover this area solely with small cells. The solution is macro is the anchor, small cells to fill in. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Tinka, you have a question?
She does, but she can't unmute, so
Okay.
I'm gonna ask for her if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'll just read it verbatim so that I don't, she says, how long is the lease for and how much?
Good
I'm not
question.
gonna, okay.
No.
So our lease terms are a 5-year initial term followed by 4 or 5-year extensions. As far as business terms, that's something that we could negotiate. But I think it's fair to say that the village would be compensated for the land and use of the site.
Well, let me ask you, that was a great question, Tinka. Thank you. If it's a 5-year lease, subject to mutual renewal or it's your option? How does that work?
It's typically at our option because it's a huge capital investment. So because we're outlining this big amount of money to construct the facility, we want to be able to make sure that we're getting use out of it. So
Well,
that
and let's say
options are at Verizon's option to
okay,
extend.
and the extension would be at the same lease rate, or would it be subject
There's
to
typically an escalator, an annual escalator. And we
it-
try and keep municipal rents consistent across the state.
now,
Something that we will discuss.
what if you make a business decision that, you know what, we're not getting our money's worth out of the tower? Do you take it down at your cost? How does that work?
Yes.
So there's a number of different ways that the village they could have what's called a removal bond. And that would entail that Verizon would post a removal bond. So should, for whatever reason, Verizon, and this won't happen, but they leave the tower in 5 years, the village board would have the ability to utilize that bond for the removal.
To take it down?
To take it down.
But we would obviously, if the lease was to be terminated, we would have the opportunity to take it down without the village calling upon that bond.
Right.
So, but
Understand.
it's something that can protect, obviously, the
Of course,
village.
yeah. We don't want to incur the
You're gonna
expense.
have zoning protections as well as lease protections. Because you're acting as a landlord as well.
So what is that bond called?
Removal bond.
Mayor, Tinka had a follow-up question.
Yep.
Also, if we sign the lease and 5 years into it, we have harmful electromagnetic fields, can we sue for damages?
That's not an appropriate question, and we're not going to address it. You're asking for legal advice from the Verizon attorney or from me, and I'm not going to provide it, and neither will counsel for Verizon. So if that question can be asked of our attorney at some other time.
Then you're not shooting the messenger.
That's okay. All right. Anybody else? Otherwise, we will move to
Chuyan has another one.
Chuyan. You shot your 2 bullets.
I know, I'm sorry. I just want to identify myself because I didn't earlier. Chuyan Hempel, 14 Butternut Road, is a follow-up question. Given the 70 times 30 foot clearing of trees, will the photo assimilation that you will do show that clearing? Because it would be pretty significant. The whole property, the Ridge Road property, is really on the ridge line. So if you cut away all the trees, then the the fake tree tower would surely become more visible. And I'm just wondering whether it's your intention to show that visually in your next round of simulation, which presumably will also include other seasons. Winter is coming. That's the most visible season.
Sure. If we are, allowed to go ahead and do another photo simulation and balloon fly during leaf off conditions, we will take into account the potential tree clearing and try to, incorporate those into the photo sims.
I know Matt wants another balloon test, right?
Yes, I do.
Leaves off balloon test, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be great.
So I think that's in the works, at least for once the season changes. Anybody else? Pete?
Hi, Mayor Pete Sendroy. I had a quick question. I don't quite understand this. So you talked about maybe 95 feet, 105 feet, so it's a Verizon tower. When other carriers join it, does that always mean that the tower becomes higher? I talked to my AT&T person earlier today, and he said other carriers would just piggyback on the existing tower. So is that how it works?
Thank you, Pete. There's a section of federal law, and Scott can probably clarify this a little bit better, but you can only increase the tower 20 feet or 20% of the overall tower height. So that
10%, 20 feet.
10% or
Whichever
20
is
feet.
less or whichever is more,
More.
whichever is more, okay.
And I'd just like to add one more point onto that. Just because we are at 95 feet on that tower, it doesn't necessarily mean that, now, in my opinion, anything below that will not work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that AT&T's engineer may have a differing opinion, and he's okay with going at 85 feet. That would obviously not require an extension, right? And I've also been on projects where we've co-located on towers below the top where we don't extend. So just because we're at 95 feet doesn't necessarily mean the other carriers are gonna deem it necessary to be above that.
And for
Your
Pete's
technical
benefit,
assessment- Your technical assessment from your analysis.
Yes.
Say any shorter would not work. So assuming their technical assessment is similar, you'd have to go up.
Yeah.
Right coverage.
Yeah, assuming, yep. Yes, sir.
but did I hear it right earlier that if we were to do a tower, we could put in the lease that you couldn't do that?
You can. You have the authority to do that. And other towns have done that in certain instances where they didn't want the tower to go higher. And so we have done it.
And then all of a sudden you have a monopoly because everybody has to switch to Verizon.
And if
And I
you,
don't have Verizon, okay, so I personally have no personal interest in this. I'm a loyal T-Mobile customer. Yes, Professor.
Just one question. You mentioned that you've been working on this for several years.
Yes.
It's my recollection that the previous administration set up a committee to look into this. Did they ever write a report? Do we have access to that?
There is a report, John. There was a report prepared, not by the committee, but there was a proposal by a third-party contractor. And if people would like to see that, which I think almost mirrors where we are today, I'd be happy to release the report. I think it's Tilson, is that the name of it? Yeah, the Tilson report, yeah. Which is obviously not a carrier, but a third-party contractor. So I'll release that. We can send that by email to everybody. So you can get a look at that and compare the old report to the new report with the understanding that at least this board is moving forward in some direction.
question. So, you said you would have to raise the tower 20 feet for an additional carrier. What if you wanted 4 additional carriers?
So
How
we
does that
don't
work?
want any, we don't care. who comes.
Well, we care.
No, I understand. I'm not trying to be facetious. If 4 additional carrier, well, you probably only have 3 additional. You only have 3 licensed, so.
Okay.
So, but if they came and they wanted to go higher, it depends on what the lease says. If this board were to restrict the height of the lease, we would say, sorry, we can't do it. We don't have the,
Or you can go below.
yeah, or below. We can't, but we can't go higher. We don't have the legal interest to do that.
And how far below, like, does there have to be a spacing between?
There is, I would leave that. to the-
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Typically,
yeah, so antenna tip to tail, so meaning the top of the carrier on the bottom. From the top of the antenna for the carrier on the bottom to the bottom of the antenna for the carrier on top is typically 2 feet, 2 or 3 feet, I believe.
Typically for towers, they'll be leased in 10-foot increments. So in this case, Verizon would be leasing from 90 feet to 100 feet, give or take.
and then the next one. would be
So
from
yeah,
80 to
so
90.
like Brian said, you know, your lease space is typically 10 feet on the tower. Antennas are typically 8 feet in length,
So there could only be 1 additional tower per 10 feet?
I'm sorry. I don't-
Could you, how many carriers can you fit if you go up just 10 feet or 20 feet? Can you fit all of them?
It would,
Because-
it would depend on their designs, what they need, if they're, you know, if they're going above us, they could be asking for heavier equipment. It could affect there's a whole lot of factors that could affect that. So I can't really answer that.
Chris?
How many of your towers, the Verizon towers so far are standalone Verizon towers? Or how many have you allowed the other carriers to, what sort of percentage? Because it sounds like you're pretty resistant to.
No, no,
Oh,
no.
no, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. We're not recent. We don't care, but we have agreements with everyone that, because we freely co-locate. We look to co-locate first. So if there's so we aren't resistant at all. I didn't mean to say that.
What's the percentage, roughly?
I could get you that.
I would say that the majority of our towers, we have to provide co-location capabilities to, in the zoning requirements. However, in terms of answering the questions, how many carriers come out our existing facilities, that's something that's difficult to answer, but we provide co-location on most of our towers.
In fact, the towers are designed because of the zoning. The foundation is designed to accommodate additional loads above and beyond what we're providing, as well as the steel too.
Correct.
So that if that happens, we know it could happen. It's there so that, in the old days, sometimes the carriers or the tower companies would only design it for one. So, but that was 30 years ago when it first started. There's no competition like that. We all need each other's towers.
All right. I would like to take an informal survey because I would like to get a sense, and I won't hold anybody to it. But first of all, in the room, is there anybody here who is absolutely opposed to a tower built anywhere in the village? Would you raise your hand? Mr. Bruno, anybody else opposed to a tower regardless of the location? Mr. Hayes, Ms. Schwartz, okay. All right. Now, I don't know if we have the capability of doing it, but how many people on Zoom are completely opposed to the erection of a tower anywhere within the village? Would you raise your hand if possible? Those of you that don't have your, just pick up, press the raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In fairness, 2 of those hands were up before you asked the question.
Well, all right, but we see that the vast majority of people who had a chance to raise their hand are not completely opposed to the idea of a tower. Okay, all right, we get some sense of the community's concern and openness to possibly build a tower somewhere in the village. And now we'll turn to the next item, which is public comment. So everybody who wants to has 3 minutes to speak, and we're going to start with the Zoom. Yes, we're starting with the Zoom. We're gonna make you sit and listen to people on. You thought you could leave early, but now you're gonna listen to the Zoom. Okay. You should have just stayed seated until I finished what I was saying. Okay, Enrique, please feel free to make a comment up to 3 minutes. Only with respect to this issue, please, if you didn't hear me at the beginning of the meeting.
You're muted.
Enrique, you're muted. Can you hear us? Can you unmute?
Guys, can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes, okay. Please
Hey
state.
guys, can you hear me now?
Yes, please
No,
state your
thank you,
name.
Mayor. No,
Please
I was gonna say,
State your name for the record and then please give us your comments.
sure, thank you, Mayor. Enrique Corridor, 81 Lorillard Road. My comment, Mayor, here. And I wanted to just take a quick statement.
Is that why we need better cell service or not? The proof is in the pudding.
And he's right up there.
Enrique, you're not coming through.
Can you hear me?
You're cutting out.
I'm taxi here. I'll try to reconnect.
Okay, all right, we'll look for somebody else. Mr. Brown, you got your hand up. Do you want to make a statement?
Yeah, just kind of a little bit more of a question, and I can make it pretty quickly. So we go with hypothetically Verizon, we limit their tower height to one particular height. No more add-ons can be added on top of that because no one wants to see it. However, other cell companies come after the town legally for sole sourcing or not providing equal opportunities with the other cell towers to raise the tower. And now we end up with 3 or 4 towers because we're discriminating against AT&T. Has that been a legal question that you guys have seen, or is that a possibility?
I'll answer that. And no, I haven't seen it because the town has a right to lease its property in the manner it seems fit. And in this case, if it was, I'm sorry, the village, if the village was to limit the height, I'm going to presume it would be doing so for aesthetic purposes. And that's a valid reason.
And there's nothing to say that the other carriers cannot co-locate on a structure below Verizon.
Okay, so you're, Mr. Brown, are you worried about the antitrust consideration? That we only allow Verizon and not the others?
Similar, yeah, basically you nailed it pretty much.
Okay, all right. Anybody else on Zoom wish to make a public statement? We have 2 screens, so make sure everybody's had a chance. Okay, great. No. Chu Yen, your hand's up. Now you get your 3 minutes.
Okay, it's part question, part statement. Following up on Mr. Pell's question and statement, what if another carrier were to purchase a piece of land within Tuxedo Park and make a lease agreement with a private property owner, and that private property owner now can cite the president of the village leasing such a tower to another carrier? So that question / statement.
Interesting question.
So if, I'm sorry, it sounds like, what if another carrier leased private property for another tower? They have every right to do that, and then they would have to follow your local zoning laws in terms of getting that tower approved. You know,
Now, the difference, of course, is that's private property, so it's going to be subject to the review by the various boards. Whereas village property is technically not subject to the same review, even though we can submit voluntarily. So I guess the issue becomes, and I'm not asking you to answer this because it wouldn't be appropriate, but if T-Mobile buys property up at Pawtucket from a private owner and says we want to build a tower there, they'd have to go through the entire zoning process and review process. What if they were to say, well, the Verizon didn't have to do that because they were on village property? Would we have a legal issue we have to deal with? A different treatment based upon different landowners.
We can ask our legal counsel that question.
Right, thank you. Okay, but that's an interesting question. Interesting point, Julian. Anything else you want to say? Cheyenne, are you done? She's muted her.
Yeah, it's done.
I'm done for the night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Davis, Clifford Davis.
Yes, good evening. I am counsel for Mr. Mahan. My office is at 200 Mamaroneck Avenue, Suite 602, White Plains, New York. I'm very confused because most municipalities have a telecommunications law, such as the town of Tuxedo. And why would the village proceed, not enact a moratorium to slow down the process, for everybody to think this thing through and create a telecommunications law, which is good for the people of the village, as opposed to this being driven by corporate Verizon? So when you create your own telecommunications law through zoning, which is not preempted by the Telecommunications Act of 1996, the village could put in what it thinks is best for the village. It could put in fall zones. A lot of municipalities, what they do is if a tower goes up 130 feet, they say that the buffer is 130 feet. Right now, there are so many gaps in the law that when Verizon comes in, they have an unfair advantage in the regulatory process because you can't impose something that doesn't exist. So, I throw out to the village, what's the rush? For all of these years, you haven't had a tower. Why not do it right? Why not create a law? Why not create a committee of people within the community to assist the Board of Trustees? Do it right, do what's good for the village, and then Verizon has to comply with your regulations. So I would submit that because I've never seen a municipality entertain a carrier without their own law. And I've been involved in many litigations in which there were moratoriums passed and everything. Years and years ago, one of the very first moratoriums was in Tarrytown, and that was based on health. Then people realized you couldn't litigate on the health issue, but you could always litigate on zoning. So why shouldn't the village, study, hire experts, make Verizon, pay for those experts and do it the right way?
No, we don't need a response. Once we have attorneys dueling with each other, we'll never get out of here. So thank you, Mr. Davis. You can send me the bill. Next, anybody else? Anybody else on Zoom? Okay, we're back to the room. Mr. Bruno, please feel free to take the podium and tell us what you think.
I think Verizon did a really nice presentation. And it made me really want to be able to have cell service at my home, which I've lived in for 12 years, which would be very exciting. So that's one thing to think about. But more importantly, when I moved here 12 years ago, I got used to the fact that I have to go stand by certain windows to make calls, and then we got carrier service over our wireless, which is better but not great. But I accepted the lack of service for the trade-off in having the feeling of safety when you're out on the road biking or walking or with your dog. So right now, if you look at the statistics for accidents related to mobile, they're higher than, I'm guessing, drinking and driving. So I haven't heard that brought into the conversation. And I've always been fearful that we would get better connection somehow without even a tower, that it would just be stronger somewhere else and we'd lose that safety. But I think we have to decide if feeling comfortable that our children, our pets, our friends, visitors are walking around the lake, that they don't have to be as worried about someone who's texting and driving. We're all addicted to our phones. I've heard some good reasons why people really want this service everywhere. But we have a lot of people working in our community that don't live here. They get a text and their phone's on the seat, they're reaching for it. It's just, we're programmed. There's no turning it off. So the fact that we don't have service has been, I think, a really great benefit to our community and one that should really be considered in making this decision. If we want to be comfortable that at least we know where on the lake you're going to have service and where you're not. And eventually it'll change, but it's pretty nice that way now. So
thank you, Mr. Bruno. Anybody else in the room?
I just thought of something.
Mayor
Our
Newhouser?
landlines, Lely Newhouser, Stable Road. I've heard rumors that they will be taken away from us in a year or two. Is that true?
Oh, I called and asked for a landline and Verizon would not put it in, even though our phone, because the very thing.
That's Shell Farley.
Yes, that's more regret. And so I would love it if you cocould talk to the powers that be to let us bring back, because we are wired.
We're not Verizon.
Yeah.
We're Verizon Wireless. There is a connection,
Yeah.
but we don't have anything to do with landlines or any connection.
But
Sorry.
is there any truth to that rumor that in a year or two, we will no longer have landline service? Just curious. I've heard that. So
I've never heard that.
I work directly for Verizon. I've not heard it, but again,
Verizon Wireless.
Verizon. To his point, we're essentially separate silos.
I don't think you're gonna get your answer from these folks.
We don't have the answer,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah. Shell, did you want to add something or was?
I was just commenting, I tried to buy it and they wouldn't sell it.
Okay.
So,
Anybody else in the room wish to take the podium at this point? Okay. Well, I want to thank, Okay,
I think I think it should be noted for the record that the trustees, received a petition today with, 133 signatures so far and still, counting. It will be presented formally at the meeting. I don't think it's the 18th unless we're having the meeting on Friday.
it's the 16th.
Right, I think
Yeah,
it's the
16th.
18th, but I think it's the 16th, just to make sure everybody knows when the meeting will be. And so obviously, I think we'll discuss the petition at that meeting, but I think it should be noted that there's a significant number of people who have signed on to it as part of this process. I think that those opinions should be noted.
I appreciate that and mentioning the 16th. Do we have a quorum for the 16th, folks, or do we have an issue
I'm
on
not
that?
sure.
What?
I'm not.
Okay, Michelle's not here. I hate to take up your time, but I want to make sure that we may have to change that date. Trustee Scherer, are you going to be available on the 16th in person or no, or you can't give us an answer? Because it's an important meeting.
I won't be in person. I will not be in
You will not be in person, okay?
And I will
So-
not be in
Josh
person.
So Josh
You will?
needs, you won't
Oh,
be
you
here?
won't
So we can't.
Okay, so it will not be the 16th because the law requires us to have 3 warm bodies here. And
You didn't get my answer.
we don't, no one else is
Doesn't
gonna be
matter.
here. It doesn't,
Oh.
Josh, you and Mark.
Okay.
It's just you and me,
You can say
buddy.
yes and points.
I thought I was needed for once. Okay, that's fine.
No, okay, so the meeting will not be on the 16th. I'm making that a public statement. I'm gonna see if we can do it on the 23rd. And we'll send out a notice to all residents that the meeting's been postponed for a week. We'll work that out without your presence.
Right.
Okay.
So it looks like we have one more comment.
Matt Tenari.
Oh, Matt, sure.
Here with Matthew Tenori, 94 Pine Hill. This is just a comment to Verizon. I said earlier, I build wind farms for a little year, obviously much more than you guys build. When I look to site a location, the first thing that I do is look at the houses around it. It's large infrastructure. I have a lot of confidence in it, like you in the tower. This site is too close to houses. It's just not the right thing to do. And I would ask that you, like I do professionally, look at solutions that are not in my best interest to make it work for the community. I would just ask you to evaluate those and not just take the first easiest large tower, maybe distributed, maybe not, and think of all the other options before kind of finalize things.
So, one thing if I can.
Sure, you can respond.
And I appreciate your comment. I don't think we're trying to take the easy way out here. We always will go to a municipality first for a number of reasons. We want to, kind of find out what would be good locations in that municipality. If we provide a benefit to the municipality because they would get the revenue. It's not like we just said, well, this is the easy way out, just do it. We're here, we're happy to be here tonight. We're happy to, talk about this. We initially came here at the request of the village before this administration. I mean, for years, it's went back and.
I was on the previous subcommittee. I was
Okay.
trying to figure out better service, so we were begging for it.
Yeah, and so my point is like, this is, everybody knows you need the service. And it's just a matter, I guess, of, is this something that the village is going to do, at least it's a space? It wasn't just the easy way out for us. We do, by the way, put towers next to structures. I mean, like 10 feet off of structures. They're next to bars, next to this. Because we have the ultimate confidence, these things, when properly built, designed, maintained, etc., they don't fall down. They don't.
We built one in the town of Pittsburgh next to a church that holds a nursery school, right next to the building.
Oh, not evil people.
My point is, there's the option that you propose, which was the standard kind of single tower, maybe you have distributed antennas outside of it or not. You've heard from a lot of people tonight. You'll see in the petition we shared with you, people are asking to see options. That's what I'm asking you to look at.
Understood. And we have looked at options, maybe. And we looked at one
And
today. We went up
have
to.
share it with everyone.
Yeah, well,
We only see.
we're
we
gonna
only
do
see
some
one.
additional work because we were just up on
We are
Pawtucket.
always
Road.
open to suggestions.
Yes.
We have looked at options. We're open to suggestions, but as Scott notably pointed out, the village came to Verizon. This location we're proposing right now has been under discussion for many years. This
Right, and there's-
location.
To do a few years ago about it, and then it went away, like, this is a.
If this is a
recurring
location
thing.
that actually works, as Brendan mentioned to you, it's a very challenging area because of topography. Very challenging.
And the other thing I would add too, in terms of water, we do a lot of sites on municipal water tank properties.
Yes, we do.
And those properties are historically and traditionally rather small. So we will have a tower that's typically within 30 feet, 20 feet of a water tank. It's pretty standard. Again, because we have the ultimate confidence that these do not fall down.
No, we don't.
That's, well, I hear what you're saying. We were just up on Pawtucket Road before this meeting, looking at kind of a new location, and Brendan said, yeah, we'll look at it. I'm gonna do what the coordinates for it, we wanna look at it, because we're not shying away from other alternatives. So that information will be forthcoming.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chris,
Sorry, one last question. Just
make
to
it the last
clarify,
one.
Did you say that these micro towers, the little towers that could help, they have to work in conjunction with a large tower? We cannot, it's not either or.
So in Verizon's network, we don't cover a whole village such as yours with just small cells, is what I'm saying. These are absolutely standalone solutions that will work on their own. They don't need a nearby tower to work on their own. Just application wise, they don't cover very far. They don't serve many people. It's just, like I said,
It would be very inefficient.
yeah, you want to hammer a nail with a hammer, right? You don't, it's using the right tool for the job.
So to Chris's point, I think the heart of it, has there ever been a scenario where a village partnered to do micros or the small cells and then incur some of the additional cost?
I'm sure there has been, but I'm not 100% sure.
I don't think it would be a situation like this, though. Typically, it's more of an urban area. In fact, we're not shy about building small cells. We started that process a while ago, although we are backing off from it because they're not as effective. And they were only, like Brendan said, really used for hotspot services where you have, the overlying coverage, but there are some areas that, just not getting the greatest service. So you have 1,000 feet or so you got to cover. That's perfect for, 50-foot tower pole, small cell, generally.
What would you, for the area, what we call the racetrack, which is on the way in from the gatehouse towards the big lake, would you put a small cell there or a micro tower? Well,
So I think you're calling them the same thing.
Yeah.
Micro tower,
Yeah,
small cell, same
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I believe that's one of the areas we identified in the slides as potentially needing coverage. So how that typically works is if this were to get approved, built and activated, we would then have a group that comes in and tests. So they'll collect drive data all throughout the park. They'll note any spots that seem like they're lacking in coverage based off of our predictions. It's a model. It's not perfect. It's pretty close, but it's not perfect. So they'll come in, get actual drive data with cell phones, and then they'll send that back to us. We'll look at it and determine if there's a need for improved
At
coverage.
this point in time, you're looking at 2 mini cells. Is that what it is? One by the racetrack? Potentially, one by the racetrack and the one below.
Essentially, there was two, essentially one by the racetrack and one right in front of that.
Below the tower. Okay. All right, folks. Thank you very much for coming. Again, the Board of Trustees meeting will be rescheduled. It will not be on the 16th of October, and we'll let everybody know when. And at this point, I'm going to make a motion, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees adjourn the public meeting at 8:45. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very much. That concludes this meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.